How do we actually draw lines on a map? Well, it's almost never simple. Today, we are unpacking the incredibly complex history of communalism and the political mechanisms that permanently altered the global landscape, ultimately leading to the partition of India. The source material we're looking at today gives us this amazing insight into the social and political tectonic plates that shifted over decades to quite literally reshape the world.
Here is the game plan for this explainer. First, we'll define communalism. Then, we'll look at the roots of the divide, explore a pretty fascinating freedom struggle paradox, and finally, track the actual path to partition. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, defining communalism and its ideological foundation.
So here's the crucial thing to understand right off the bat. This ideology, it goes way beyond just your spiritual beliefs. It directly ties a person's religious identity to their worldly, secular interests that inevitably end up clashing with those of other groups. It's basically the belief that just because you share a religion with someone, you automatically share the exact same economic, political, and social needs. And when religion becomes the main vehicle for secular competition, well, that society becomes completely primed for deep, deep division.
Moving right along to Section 2, the roots of the divide, and how this communalism was actually cultivated.
Because ideologies like this, they don't just magically appear in a vacuum. They need a very specific environment to thrive. And in colonial India, there was a potent mix of ingredients that allowed communalism to just explode. We're talking about basic, everyday differences in language, dress, and caste piled on top of massive economic inequality. For instance, educational development was hugely unequal between Hindus and Muslims, which let reactionary landlords keep a tight grip on power. Access to land, factories, and jobs was restricted to just a few privileged groups, and that sparked some fierce resentment. Then you throw militant religious reform movements into the mix, like the Wahhabi movement among Muslims and Shuddhi among Hindus, and the role of religion becomes incredibly volatile. Add in political parties actively telling their constituents to side with the colonial powers against each other, and you've got a perfect storm.
But wait, there is a massive catalyst we absolutely have to talk about: the British government's post-1857 divide and rule policy. This strategy deliberately fractured society. They prioritized certain groups for government jobs, changed up administrative structures, and pushed communal representation through things like the Morley-Minto reforms. Just think about the modern impact of a tactic like that. The colonial administration essentially institutionalized the idea that your religious identity dictated your political survival, systematically pitting communities against one another just to maintain control.
Okay, Section 3, the freedom struggle paradox. This was a real double-edged sword.
This is where the history gets super nuanced because social forces rarely just push in one direction. Believe it or not, communalism actually helped mobilize the masses against the British at first, largely through religious festivals and organizations. You had figures like Bal Gangadhar Tilak using events like the Shivaji and Ganesh festivals to drum up immense popular support. Organizations like the Muslim Mahasabha brought everyday folks right into the political fold. But on the flip side, it became a devastating hindrance. Hatred ignited, and innocent people lost their lives in horrific riots. The unified struggle against the British was severely delayed. Groups like the Muslim League stayed completely aloof during vital moments like the Quit India movement, while the Congress Party showed zero interest in the League's partition proposals. It was a gridlock.
And you can literally see how this played out geographically. The intensity of the nationalist movement was definitely not uniform across the board. While places like Bombay and Madras were fiercely united in the fight for independence, regions like Bengal and Punjab were just consumed and completely distracted by communal violence. Basically, wherever communalism burned the hottest, the unified fight against colonialism just broke down entirely.
Let's dive into our final section, Section 4, the path to partition, where we'll trace the actual political timeline.
All right, shifting gears from sociology to the hard historical timeline of how these deep divisions materialized into actual borders. This tracks the exact political fallout, starting way back in 1906, when Nawab Khwaja Salimullah formed the Muslim League at the Ishrat Manzil Palace in Dhaka. Then we jump to 1930, with Allama Iqbal proposing a Northwest Muslim amalgamation, which is the exact homeland that Rahmat Ali would later name Pakistan. From there, the political situation just rapidly deteriorates through the late 1930s.
Fast forward to a major turning point in 1937. A very successful Congress party flat-out rejected the Muslim League's offer for a coalition in UP. Congress demanded that League members actually dissolve their party if they wanted to join the government. As you can imagine, this deeply, deeply alienated the League. Bolstered by their big election win, Congress took a really hardline stance.
The source material highlights this single political rejection as the precise moment when liberal communalism shifted into a much more extreme form. It's also worth noting that 1937 was the year Muhammad Ali Jinnah successfully advocated for the Sharia Implementation Act, which ended up being absolutely vital for building Muslim solidarity on a national scale.
So what happens next? In 1938, in direct response to feeling entirely sidelined, the Muslim League established the Pir Por Committee. They officially charged Congress with interfering in religious rights, suppressing the Urdu language, and economically oppressing Muslims. Now, this wasn't just some informal grumbling. This was a highly detailed, structured report that formalized the League's grievances. It drove the wedge even deeper into the political system and convinced a lot of people that coexistence was simply becoming impossible.
And all of this political breakdown, it leads right to Muhammad Ali Jinnah fully embracing the two-nation theory, which culminated in the adoption of the Lahore Resolution, often called the Pakistan Resolution, in 1940. Presented by A.K. Fazlul Haq, this was the official point of no return. The perceived neglect by Congress had completely convinced the League leadership that Muslims and Hindus weren't just two separate communities anymore, they were two entirely distinct nations that required their own distinct political destinies.
Then we hit the historical climax in 1946. The Muslim League ended up winning a staggering 90% of the reserved seats. That is a massive, overwhelming mandate. It acted as an effective plebiscite for Pakistan, completely stripping away any remaining credibility that Congress was the sole voice for Indian Muslims. Decades of ideological growth, economic disparity, and political maneuvering had finalized the divide. The demand for a separate nation was no longer just an idea floated by intellectuals. It was now the definitive democratic will of the Muslim electorate.
As we wrap up this explainer, I've got a question for you to chew on. How do the mechanics of division from our past continue to echo in modern global politics? We've just mapped out how economic grievances, religious differences, and calculated political strategies permanently carved brand new nations out of a single subcontinent. Honestly, what we've explored today is a masterclass in how incredibly fragile unity can be when secular interests are tied exclusively to identity. Keep this historical blueprint in the back of your mind the next time you tune into the modern political news cycle. Thanks so much for joining me for this analysis, and I can't wait to guide you through our next explainer.